at the New Indian, we have with us India's one of the most flamboyant politicians, Dr. Shashi Tharoor. He doesn't need an introduction. He wears several hats: a former diplomat, a historian, a writer, a former minister, and a member of parliament from the Congress party. Welcome to Reason, the New Indians platform where we get to the reason of the issues that concern us. Dr. Tharoor, welcome.
Hello, Aarti.
I will begin with our neighborhood. In Afghanistan, after 20 years of war on terror by the US, Taliban is back in power. What do you think of the situation that has emanated from Afghanistan, given the fact that we are neighbors and given the fact that we have not supported Taliban officially?
Well, not just not supported, we've opposed them very effectively, but in the end, not so effectively because, of course, they have won. And their victory is something which I think there's no putting any varnish on it. It is a disaster for us for two very important reasons. Number one, that they are in many ways very closely identified with Pakistan, to the extent that their cabinet was only announced after the head of the ISI, General Faiz Hamid, went to Kabul and sort of almost presided over the formation of the government there. So clearly, Pakistan, which in so many ways has malign intentions towards us, will be seeing the Taliban government in Kabul very much as its cat's paw. And if you look at the fact that amongst the dominant elements there are the Haqqanis, who have been given the Interior Ministry and half a dozen other useful portfolios. And the Haqqanis are the very same people who are responsible for two bombings of the Indian embassy in Kabul. You can't absolutely look forward to anything from this government that will not serve the interests of Pakistan. So that's the first bad news. The second bad news is that we have the historical memory of what happened the last time they were in power, from 1996 to 2001. You have seen the so-called Islamic Emirate at work. And that was the time when they were extremely hostile to India, when the notorious hijacking of an Indian Airlines aircraft to Kandahar actually resulted in the deaths of some Indian citizens and eventually culminated in the humiliation of the Indian government of Prime Minister Vajpayee and the surrender by us of convicted terrorists who then went on to do terrible things. As you know, Maulana Azhar was responsible in many ways for a large portion of the 26/11 attacks in Mumbai. The fellow whose name for the moment escapes me, something Sheikh, was responsible for the murder of Daniel Pearl. So you're looking at very, very dangerous, I would even argue evil people being released at the behest of the hijackers on friendly Taliban-controlled soil. So the experience was bad enough, and we have every reason to worry what will our next experience be with the Islamic Emirate version 2. Now, there are some who hope that that there's going to be a Taliban 2.0, which will not be as bad as Taliban 1.0, but for so far the differences, if any, seem marginal. For example, the earlier Taliban refused to let women study at all. This Taliban has prevented female teachers from teaching, has prevented female government employees from going to their offices, has essentially made life difficult for women in any sort of official function, but has at least said girls can continue to study, but no longer in mixed classrooms, not even with a partition or whatever. They will have to be taught in their own separate arrangements with female instructors only, and that if there are not enough female instructors available, which given their own policies is not going to be easy, then males will have to teach them from behind a curtain or something. So you're looking at a very marginal improvement when it comes to something like women's education. On other laws, like the disallowing of women being out on the streets on their own, unless they're accompanied by a male relative, no change. The requirement for head-to-toe covering, no change. The disallowing of women in the public space, no change. No women in government. And I suspect, since they don't have it, they've dissolved essentially the existing parliament, that it's unlikely there are going to be women represented in whatever new institution they create. They say that the Loya Jirga is not Islamic, which was the traditional Afghan parliamentary arrangement. So we'll have to see what comes in its place. And if that's not Islamic, then it's highly unlikely that women's voice will be heard again. So I'm not at all enthused by those who say, no, 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 the Taliban have learned over 20 years of being on the outs, and they're going to make sure they don't make the same mistakes again.
What should be India's position?
Well, I was going to say, on the contrary, I think things are slightly worse for us because not only these two factors I've gone into some detail, but there is a larger worry about the emergence of a China, Pakistan, Afghanistan axis, which is going to be certainly more, shall we say, mutually embedded than the last time. Last time, China was at best neutral. They were still very worried about any Islamist, extremist points of view influencing their own Uyghur minority in Xinjiang, Western Turkestan, Eastern Turkestan. But the difficulty with the Chinese position today for us is that they've actually established a pretty good relationship with the Taliban. They're saying, we'll give you money, we'll give you significant billions of dollars in return for exploring minerals in Afghanistan and so on. And in return, of course, for the Taliban cooperating with the single biggest investment the Chinese have in their Belt and Road Initiative, which is the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. So this China-Pakistan-Afghanistan thing is no longer just Pakistan-Afghanistan with China at best as neutral. Now China is an active and even leading participant in the emergence of this trio. But to make matters still worse, last time around, both Iran and Russia were hostile to this, and they were working with us as new. It's an open secret that Iran and India were both involved in giving support to Ahmad Shah Massoud and his Panjshiri freedom fighters. Well, right now there are no Panjshiri freedom fighters left worth the name because they've been routed by the Taliban just a few days ago. But what's worrying for us, or multiply worrying for us, in addition to all that I've told you, is that the Russians are now pretty much neutral because they have become much more pro-Chinese in the emerging scenario in the last 20 years. And the Iranians seem to be adopting a line that the Taliban could still be a good thing for Iran because Iran itself is a hardline Islamist government, provided, of course, that they do not harass or persecute the Shia minority, which are basically Hazaras as well as Tajiks and Uzbeks to some degree, not all, but some are Shia. And Iran naturally has a close relationship with that part of the Muslim community, the Shia population. But if the Taliban does not persecute them, then they can easily neutralize Iran, which otherwise likes having a strongly Islamist state there. And Iran too has been warming up to the Chinese and vice versa. So what I dread the most, and what will be the biggest challenge emerging for Indian diplomacy, is that we will have right on our sort of Western doorstep a Pakistan, Afghanistan, China axis on the one hand, with possibly Iran's complicity and Russia's at best neutrality, which essentially gives us a very unpleasant set of concerns towards the West at a time when on our northern border the Chinese seem to be itching to readjust the LAC along their interests and in their favor. This is a terribly hostile set of circumstances for us, for which I don't see, frankly, a very good answer. Turning to the Americans will not solve everything. The Americans are never going to be engaged in India's land problems. They would certainly want to cooperate with us in big geostrategy and maybe in the waters, but where they have ships and we have ships.
Are you saying Quad is not really a viable option? Do you think the axes that Pakistan, China and Iran and plus Taliban will not be neutralized by Quad?
No, I think Quad is a viable option, but not for our land troubles, not for our territorial problems on both borders. Because essentially the Quad has an overarching vision, which I don't think we have any problem with, but the capacities of the other members, namely Australia, Japan, and the US, would be exercisable. Of course, money they have probably good intelligence capacity, good aircraft, surveillance, all that sort of stuff. But above all, it's going to be maritime. And maritime would mean that they would represent a capacity to balance the Chinese in the South China Sea, the East China Sea, and further they might be able to be of some benefit to India on the Indian Ocean. But the Chinese are too smart to fight a maritime war. Why would the Chinese be worried about the quote unquote balancing effect?
Are you saying India is cornered?
I'm saying that right now we do look a bit cornered, at least when it comes to our north and west, which is a very substantial portion of our strategic vulnerability.
Your comment, rather tweet, on Malayali Taliban stirred a lot of controversy. Where did that come from?
It comes from the fact that as an MP, I myself have received a mother from my constituency whose daughter married a fellow, got converted, and was taken off to Afghanistan. And not only was that fellow, I mean, when she came to see me, she was requesting me to arrange a meeting for her with our then Foreign Minister, the late Sushma Swaraj, which I did, and which is therefore a matter of public record because Sushma ji has also tweeted about her meeting with this lady and so on. There is no doubt that this is one of many similar cases of Malayalis who sadly got inveigled by wrong-headed people into going off to fight the Taliban's fight in Afghanistan. In fact, the husband who converted her and took her off was himself killed in fighting in Afghanistan. And this lady ended up in a jail in Kabul. And then the mother came to me asking whether I could help get her back to India to face trial if necessary in India. Now, as you know, the government of Narendra Modi was not particularly keen on bringing any of these people back. And there I have a difference with the government because I believe that it's a sovereign right of every Indian citizen to be home. I don't think that we can say to an Indian passport holder, you cannot come back to India. But if they've done something wrong, we can arrest them, we can try them, we can whatever. Though, unfortunately, we don't have some sort of law, the equivalent of waging war against a friendly state or whatever. So I don't know how exactly we would find a basis to try the lady, but Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, I don't know, whatever it may be, we could have brought her back. In the meantime, while the Indian government was deciding whether we would allow these people, and she's not the only one, I think we knew of at least 5 Malayali Taliban widows who could have been brought back. In the meantime, the Taliban won. And by unverified reports, they've all been released. So these people are there. So when I said this, I wasn't joking as some people foolishly thought. I was merely referring to the fact that it is an established fact that a handful, and I literally mean a handful, the number cannot exceed 20, and it's probably not much more than 5 or 10, a handful of Malayalis did go and join the Taliban cause and fight alongside the Taliban. There was a report about 2 years ago of some Malayalis being killed in an American bombing in Tora Bora, in the caves in Afghanistan. So if those Malayalis were killed, what were they doing there? They hadn't gone to do tourism. They had gone to fight alongside the Taliban. So saying they were Malayali Taliban strikes me as a very silly thing to be finding controversial, because it's a fact.
But
I didn't mean to imply that every Malayali Muslim was pro-Taliban, which is nonsense. In fact, I would say 99% are not. And I think to read more into my tweet than I specifically said in relation to a video in which you can hear Malayalam being spoken by 2 Taliban, I said it looks like there are at least 2 Malayalis in the Taliban, or it sounds like it. Now, the fact is that there is one theory expressed by the person on Twitter who had put this video up, that it may not have been Malayalam at all, that there is a Dravidic language in Afghanistan called Brahui, that this was merely Brahui being spoken. Since I don't know anybody who knows that language, I don't know if that's true or not. But it certainly sounded like a Malayalam word, meaning let him speak samsarikete, I think was the word that was being spoken about. So I tweeted it, letting people draw their own conclusions. I'm a big believer, you provide information, let people draw their own conclusions. But our social media space is full of people who don't like to allow any individual to think for themselves. They want to impose their groupthink on them, and that doesn't suit me.
You've stirred another controversy. You are supporting the syllabus include Savarkar's and Golwalkar's writings. Isn't that almost going against the party line or going against what the Congress government, successive governments have been practicing in this country?
First of all, it's not a Congress government right now. It's a communist government. And what is more, the syllabus was prescribed by a university, not by a government. In fact, it's one particular college in Kannur University, a very reputed college, Brennan College, which happens to be the college from which the Chief Minister has graduated, as well as the President of the Congress Party in Kerala. So that college, in its syllabus, which of course was approved by the Vice Chancellor, had, if I've got it right, I've only read media accounts, I haven't had time to go and check this out myself, had writings of Gandhiji, Nehruji, Tagore, and of also Golwalkar and Savarkar. And it's on, I think, a course on politics and governance. Now, my view, and it has been my consistent view, speaking not as a politician, by the way, in the interview that I gave, I stressed I was not speaking as a politician, but as a public intellectual, if you want, or as an amateur academic, if you want, somebody who reads and thinks and writes and therefore can have some pretensions to those titles. I said, it is very important for you to be exposed to all ideas and all points of view and then come to your own conclusions. So if you want to disagree with Golwalkar and Savarkar, at least know what you're disagreeing with by reading them. I have read them extensively. I don't think it has changed my views at all. In fact, in many ways, I have read them through the prism of what I consider to be right for my country, and I've criticized them strongly. But if you read my book, Why I'm a Hindu, and certainly portions of my recent book, The Battle of Belonging, you will find some pretty extensive references to their thoughts and direct quotations from their writings, which obviously I couldn't have quoted if I hadn't read them and didn't have the actual words to quote. Now, I'm saying that students should read all points of view, whether they disagree with it or not. I've read Marx. I'm not a Marxist, and I don't particularly think that he had very, very useful things to say, for example, about India. But the truth is that reading the man is the best way to know what you're reacting to and whether you agree or not. The same applies to every other thinker.
As an academic, a scholar, a researcher, a writer, and a historian, what are the similarities you find in Savarkar's idea of India and Nehru's idea of India?
Well, I find some fairly significant differences. And in fact, I think they became starkly apparent at the time of independence, which is 25 years after Savarkar first wrote the essentials of Hindutva. But in 47, when independence came, what was striking was that Savarkar did not particularly object to partition. Indeed, as president of the Hindu Mahasabha, he had made a speech saying that Hindus and Muslims are two different nations. But rather that he objected to the idea that India, or the nation of India, was a territory and that the constitution of India should be written for all the people on it. This is what Savarkar, Golwalkar, and later Deen Dayal Upadhyay all objected to. They said, you've written a constitution between 47 and 50 that is for all the people living on the territory that you have called India. Wrong. A nation is not a territory. A nation is a people, and the people of India are the Hindu people, and therefore the constitution should have been written for a Hindu Rashtra. That is the Savarkar view. And to my mind, there couldn't be a greater contrast between that view, which is echoed, as I say, this rejection of what they call territorial nationalism by both Golwalkar and Upadhyay, but it is the direct antithesis of the view held by Gandhiji, Nehru, Dr. Ambedkar, Rajendra Prasad, Maulana Azad, you name them all, who thrashed this issue out in the Constituent Assembly and who said that basically, as far as they were concerned, our freedom struggle had been for everybody. The Constitution be rights would entrench the rights of everybody, and India would be a country for everybody. So these are two completely different views of what Indian
But
nationalism is.
Savarkarites would argue that Hindu, the definition of Hindu is cultural identity. It is not necessarily religious identity. What would you say to that? Because the idea of India that Nehru described also is about this larger cultural continuum that begins from Himalayas and goes down to
They
Kanyakumari.
both see that, and I think they both would share respect for the civilizational content of Indianness. Because, for example, Nehruji often wrote almost in a romanticized way about Indian civilization. And even though independence was coming in the 20th century, he had no pretensions that it was going to be a new India. He felt it was a continuation of an India that had existed civilizationally for a very long time. There, Savarkar would agree. But the difference was that Nehru wrote of India as a palimpsest on which various different kinds of people, generations, travelers, religious figures of various different religions had all come, had all contributed, had all written one on top of the other without erasing what had lain in the layers beneath. Whereas Savarkar, in fact, saw a pure, pristine Hindu civilization which had then been attacked by others, but which has had now an opportunity to reassert itself. This is again the difference between the RSS and the what is I think wrongly called the secularists. For 30 odd years I've been writing that I prefer the term pluralist to secularist because secular, strictly speaking, if you look up an English language dictionary, it relates to distancing from religion. Whereas what we do in India under the name secularism is to encourage a proliferation of religion. So, to my mind, what we are actually celebrating is pluralism, is diversity. Now, that emphasis on diversity is very much there in the Nehruvian thinking and is sought to be suppressed in the RSS, Savarkar, Golwalkar thinking. One of the things that I've written about in one of my books, and I think it may well be the most recent one, is that whereas we speak, we being the pluralists, if you like, of unity in diversity, that is, we celebrate the diversity but see an overarching unity. My famous or notorious metaphor for this, which I've been saying for 35 years, so I'll say it again, is that India is not a melting pot but a thali. We're a collection of different dishes in different bowls. The dishes are in separate bowls, so they don't necessarily flow into each other all the time, but they belong together on the same platter and they combine on your palate to give you a satisfying repast. That's the idea of India that enshrines diversity. Whereas the RSS idea of India is not unity in diversity, it is diversity in unity. They say you start, so whereas I have a thali idea, theirs is a khichdi idea. That India is a khichdi. You may have an aloo here and a gajar there, or a lump here, a lump there, but basically we are all Hindus. And there may be slight variations, slight diversities, but within that concept of Hindu unity. Now this, to my mind, is again a completely divergent view. So even one sees superficial similarities, they actually proceed from different premises.
You took a very tough stand against Delhi police on the riots in Delhi during NTCA protests. What were you really objecting to?
I was objecting to shall we put it very bluntly, the unfairness of many of their procedures and some of the sloppiness involved. And I wasn't doing it myself. I was quoting an article which has studied 40 court judgments from various courts at various levels in Delhi, up to and including the High Court. And what they've done is they have actually found the very words I've quoted in my tweet in the judgments that these courts have passed, which have really amounted to pretty embarrassingly severe strictures on the way in which the police have handled the investigation. Look, let's face it, both communities were involved, yes. But one community was overwhelmingly victimized, also, yes. Much of the incitement you hear and see on the record, and you can have visual evidence for, video evidence for, etc., came from only one side. So when you go around claiming to be even-handed, and you prosecute equal numbers of people on both sides, and in fact you don't pursue certain evident cases of incitement, but you pursue others, then it will be seen as at the very least, a slipshod investigation, and at the worst, a biased one. So this has to be called out for what it is. Our system of justice depends very much on the fair and even-handed behavior of the police. And on the investigations of the Delhi riots, the evidence as analyzed by the courts, and I stress this is not me or any NGO, this is an absolute judicial series of judgments, 40 different courts, is that the police did not cover themselves with glory in the way they've handled this over the last couple of years.
Critics would say that you took a stand against Delhi police because Delhi police came after you in the alleged murder of your wife, Sunanda Pushkar.
Well, even they didn't allege that. Only some of your friends in the media use that word. They alleged abetment to suicide. But you will see that nowhere, anywhere in the record have I said one word against the Delhi police or the judiciary at any stage of these 7.5 years. On the contrary, as the police themselves have testified in court, they had 100% cooperation from me. Anything they wanted, they were given. They wanted access to my personal emails, they were given the entire lot. They checked every single thing. They raided my house and confiscated phones and laptops. At no stage was there any complaint. I didn't want anyone to suggest that at any degree there would be lack of cooperation from me, because I respect the system and the process and I wanted to cooperate with sincerity. So if you find one place where I have said anything negative about the Delhi police in connection with that investigation, I would be astonished and I would take back those words, but I haven't said it. That's the point. Not even in private, because I believe that, especially since there I'm an interested party, as it were, because I am fighting to establish the truth, which is my innocence. Why would I want to, in any way, feel entitled to pass judgment on them on that matter? But on other matters, whether it's the handling of the Delhi riots or whether it is the manner in which law and order is maintained in our capital city, I'm entitled to express my views, because I am not a directly involved party in any of this, and I'm speaking with objectivity.
This is probably for the first time that you are speaking about this issue ever since your wife died. How did it feel when the court gave you a clean chit in the case?
I prefer not to go into all of this, because the wounds are still very intensely personal and still very raw. As I said to the judge at the time, there was a sense of relief, which in some ways has still not fully sunk in, because it had been an enormous torture to go through a period of 7.5 years of my life with false allegations hanging like a cloud over me. And, I'm afraid I've been goody two-shoes all my life, never violated anything, always the teacher's pet, never, breaking any rules, and suddenly to be accused of unthinkable things that no one who knows me would even consider me capable of. That was very, very painful. And it was painful not just for me, but for my family, my now 85-year-old mother, who went through really terrible moments because of this. So all of this has been an extremely difficult thing to live through. And one had to live through it with the best face one could. And for me, the best way of coping with it was cooperate fully, let the police and the judiciary and the lawyers do their job, and concentrate on not letting this define who I am. Instead, making my speeches, writing my articles, writing my books, doing what I believe I've been given the talent and the capacity and the intellect or whatever to contribute. At the end of the day, positions one holds or controversies one gets involved in, if those are the ones you're focusing on, will matter very much less than the ideas, the values, the words one leaves behind. And that's where I personally prefer to be remembered.
The Congress party seems to be in a crisis. Some of the most prominent faces of the Congress party have left. For example, Jyotiraditya Scindia. There's been a talk about Sachin Pilot leaving the party. There's been a talk even about you. What's happening in the Congress party?
The talk about me was ill-founded, because frankly, my political values didn't come to me from the Congress party. I've been writing and published and have expressed a certain view about India, Indian history, the nature of Indian politics for, I'm afraid, now getting close on to 40 years. So I'm quite long in the tooth. And my political innings is only a dozen years old. So I felt that what I had brought to the Congress party was decades of reflection, analysis, and thinking, and then a certain set of values. And if I don't have something to contribute to the party, then why am I in the party? Because frankly, anyone can be a rubber stamp for other people's ideas. I came in with my own ideas, and those ideas have found a welcome home in the Congress party that they would not find anywhere else. So to my mind, I think those who suggested I was going to leave the Congress really hadn't read me. I had no idea what I actually believed and stood for. They're sometimes misled by the fact that I don't believe in groupthink. I'm somebody who believes in speaking my own mind individually. I make up my own mind individually. I read what others have to say. I approach most issues with an open mind. So if somebody comes to me with a pro-BJP argument, I don't just dismiss it because it's pro-BJP. I listen to it and see if I can refute it, or whether there are good points in it worth paying heed to. So that's the way I am, and that is often not appreciated by those who expect a Congress MP to rigidly follow a party line and to get his thinking from elsewhere. I don't get my thinking from anywhere else. I think through things myself. And as I say, my own ideas happen to be quite congruent on the key issues with those of the Congress party. So I don't think that's particularly correct. Scindia, Sushmita Dev, and others each had individual reasons, and I think they relate to their individual political circumstances, which are not the case across the board. I think every congressman is different. I will simply say that I believe firmly that the Congress represents the best hope for a credible national alternative to the misrule, the ineptitude, and the misgovernance we have seen over the last 7 years from the BJP. And that if you want a better, more capable government, the Congress Party offers the capacity, the experience, and I believe the right principles and values to be able to deliver that. Now, getting from here to there requires organizational capacity, money, resources, muscle, cadres on the ground, and ultimately votes. And there's still 3 years to go before the next opportunity to deliver all that, but we clearly should be starting by now to getting our act together. There are also 16 state elections between now and the general elections of 24, and we need to put up a good enough show in those state elections that the voters will believe in us at the national level. So all of that needs to be done. And I'm, yes, one of those who've been a bit impatient, particularly last year, with the fact that we didn't seem to be energized enough in that direction. That seems to be changing, and I welcome it. And I hope that we will be moving in the right direction in the time to come.
Well, thank you so much for your time. This has been a fascinating conversation.
Thank you, Aarti, and good luck to the new Indian.